Hello students, as you all know we are dealing with the paper which is called as Fundamental Principle of Social Research. Until now we have completed our two lessons and we had started with the third lesson in my last lecture, and the third lesson name is Types and Methods in Social Research. So, in the types and methods in social research, we are going to discuss the topic advantages and disadvantages of qualitative and quantitative research. In my last lecture, we have already discussed what is meant by qualitative and quantitative research. If you have missed that, so please go and see, because this is the continuation part of my last lecture. Now first we will going to see the objective of this particular lesson, that is to examine the advantages and disadvantages of qualitative and quantitative research, and after this completion of this topic you are able to give the answer or able to find out, identify, evaluate and strengthen the limitation of qualitative and quantitative research. Now let's begin to understand the advantages of qualitative research. In that we are having first is in-depth understanding. So here students, qualitative research is giving us or helping us to go for the detailed study about our problem. So under the qualitative research, detailed understanding of people's experiences, feelings, beliefs and behavior can be studied. To understand it more easily, I'll give you an example. Like for example, if a sociologist wants to study bullying in school, they don't just have to ask how many students were bullied. They talk to students to understand how bullying affect their feelings, friendship, and daily life. In simple words, it helps us to understand the whole experience, not just numbers. Second advantages is studies real life situation. So qualitative research often study people in their natural environment. For example, if researcher wants to understand family relationship, they might observe and interview people in their normal home or community setting. So we can get the study, or we can study the people where their real life social life happens. The third advantages of qualitative research, that it explores the meaning. So qualitative research helps us understand what experiences mean to people. For example, two students may both fail in an exam. One may see it as a normal setback, while another may feel it is a major failure. Qualitative research can explore why they understand the same event differently. So, in simple word, we can understand that qualitative research helps. What does this experience means to that person? Qualitative research is also flexible in its nature. Uh, Qualitative research helps us to do the research is not in very rigid area. Researcher can explore the new ideas when they appear during the study. For example, to start studying students' academic stress. During interview, students repeatedly mention problem with transportation. The researcher can explore how transportation affects their education. So, if something important comes up, the researcher can flow the new idea. So as such, there is no restriction on the researcher to do in this or that setting only, but according to the situation, according to the information which he is going, he can flow with that new idea. Then another advantages we are having, the it gives the people's perspective. So this qualitative research allows people to speak in their own words and explain their own uh, explain their opinions and experiences, because most of the, like we are dealing with the people, those who are living in a society, and not all the people are, good in particular language only. So we can talk to them, we can communicate to them in their own language or in their own words, which will help them to express their opinions and experiences easily and in detail. So instead of just simply asking students to rate their school from 1 to 10, researcher can ask, what do you like and dislike about your school? So by asking this type of question, or not asking directly that how you will going to rate your school, this question will going to help you in more to gather the information or accurate information. So it gives voice to the people to being studied in the qualitative research. Then we are having the last advantages to discuss here is useful for new topics. Qualitative research is useful when researchers are studying a topic that is new or not well understood. Yes, so it qualitative research helps the researcher to study to go for the new topics, and one, like for example, the person who have not touched that topic or not have explained it or understood it very much, so that topic also he can take for his research. Now I'll give you one example to clear it more. Suppose a new type of social media becomes popular. Now, a sociologist can interview young people to understand how they use it and how it affects their relationship and communication. So, in simple words, this qualitative research helps the researcher to explore unfamiliar social issues. Now let's move to the another slide, which is talking about the disadvantages of research, qualitative research. The first is time consuming. As we are discussing that qualitative research is doing an in-depth study, studying the experiences and opinions of the people. So of course, the qualitative research can take a long time because researcher may conduct a detailed interviews, observation and analysis. Okay, so yes, of course, the qualitative is a detailed research and it takes more time to do. Then we are having a small samples, as just now we have discussed here, that we are studying the people's behavior, their opinion in detail. So we are conducting the interview and observation and doing the analysis. Of course, it will take more time. So we cannot collect the big sample and we can't do the research on a big sample. So qualitative studies usually involves a relatively small number of participants because researchers study each person in detail. Okay, so in simple words, small sample may lead to the detailed information but limited representation. Then we are having the another disadvantage, that is difficult to generalize because the sample is often small, like we have seen like in the quantitative, like if the 1,000 people are there, then we are going to collect the at least 100 students or the participant data will going to collect. But here, as we are doing a detailed information, detailed study, so automatically the sample size is getting small. So because of that, it becomes difficult to generalize our findings, and means it becomes a difficult to generalize the conclusion on the whole population. Yes, so because the sample is often small and specific, the findings may not be applied to the entire population. I'll give you an example over here. Like for example, a researcher interviews 20 students from one school, 20 students from one school, and finds that they feel stressed because of homework, we cannot automatically say that all students everywhere feel the same way. So in simple words, the findings may be specific to the people studied. Then we are having the next disadvantage is researchers' biasness. The researcher's own opinion, expectations, or interpretation can sometimes influence the research. So if a researcher is strongly believing that social media harms friendship, they might unintentionally focus on one negative comment from participant. So researchers' personal viewpoint can affect the interpretation. Next, we are having difficult to replicate. It can be difficult for another researcher to repeat the exact same study and get exactly the same result. Why? Because people's feelings, relationship, and social situation also change over a period of time. So a researcher interviews students about, like, for example, they are studying the students their school life in 2026, and if another researcher repeats the same interview in several years later, the students experience and social environment may be different. So social life changes, uh, so exactly repeating the research can be difficult. The next last disadvantage is the qualitative research can produce a lot of information, especially for interviews and observation and diaries and discussion. Uh, so here, like, if a res I'll give you an example to explain this. If a researcher interviews 30 people for 1 hour each, they have around 30 hours of conversation to study and organize, which take a lot of time. And to, after collection of the large amount of data, it becomes difficult to scrutinize and analyze it properly. So, more detailed information the person will going to get, the more uh, he he has to analyze, and more time it will take for the analysis of the data. So we can say that a qualitative research is very useful in sociology because it helps us to understand people's experiences and social life in depth. However, it has its own limitation also, because it can take a lot of time, involve small samples, and be difficult to generalize. Now let's see the advantages of quantitative research. Okay, till now we have just focused the qualitative advantages and its disadvantages. Now we will going to see the quantitative research. Now first is objective results. Quantitative research mainly uses numbers and statistics, so the results are less dependent on the researcher's personal opinion. So here, the researcher cannot, give his or her opinion or viewpoints. So because the quantitative research is basically focusing or highlighting, or this is basically depending on the numbers and statistics. Okay, so the results are based on numerical or measurable data, not just the personal opinion. So when it is, measurable data, when it is not on personal opinion, so of course it will give you an objective result. Then we are having a large sample. In the quantitative research, the researcher needs to collect the data from the large sample. So quantitative research can collect the information from many or as many the people they wanted to get it involved in their research. So sometimes 100 or 1,000 samples also he can collect it. Okay, so studying more people gives a broader picture of society, and it helps, to get a more information as we are collecting from data from many people. So generalizability, it helps the researcher, if the researcher is uses a good representative sample, large sample data, the finding can often be applied to the larger population. Okay, so result can sometimes be generalized to a larger population. Okay, like for example, I'll give you an example to understand. Suppose a researcher surveys 1000 students selected to represent students across a city. If 60% report exam related studies or stress, the researcher may use this finding to estimate the situation among students in that city. Then next, we are having the reliable and replicable. So quantitative research is often used standardized questionnaire, survey and statistical method. This makes it easier for another researcher to repeat it. Okay, so research can be repeated and checked. So that is one of the advantages of quantitative research. Then we are having a easy to compare, because the information which we are getting is represented, or we are getting in numbers or represented by the numbers. Researcher can easily compare the different groups or different on a different items or time periods. So numbers here making it easier to compare. Okay, so researcher compares unemployment rates between two cities and compares the unemployment in 2020 and 2026. So unemployment of two different cities in a two different years. So here with the help of comparison we can do the comparison easily. Then the next advantages we are having, identifies pattern and relationship. Statistics can help researchers find patterns, trends, or relationship between variables. For example, a researcher studies whether there is a relationship between hours of study and examination scores. They might find the students who study more hours tend to have higher scores. So, in simple words, quantitative research helps us to discover pattern and relationship. Now, let's move to the another another slide, that is disadvantages of quantitative research. Now, uh, first is lacks depth. So numbers can tell us what is happening, but they may not tell us why it is happening. So this means because we are just playing with the numbers in the quantitative, so it gives the numbers but something not enough detailed information about something. Okay, the next disadvantage is we are having the less flexible. So quantitative research, the question and the method are usually planned before the research begins. uh, in simple way, if we want to understand, it can be difficult to change the direction during the research. So because of that, it is considered that it is less flexible. Like example, I want to give here that questionnaire asks students to choose one reason for school stress. So during the survey, students may mention the another point or another reason that was not included in the questionnaire. So maybe in that term, the researcher may lag behind because he is getting the another responses from these students that not stress, but there are the other reason also behind it. So because of that, we can say that it is less flexible. Then we are having a limited understanding of social context. Uh, Numbers may not fully explain in social, cultural, or personal circumstances behind people's behavior. So, statistics might show that students from one year area have lower school attendance, but the number alone may not explain whether the reason is transportation problem, family responsibility or financial difficulties or something else because of which they are not attending the classes or they are not regular to the school. Okay, so in simple words we can say statistic may not show the full social background, and because of which we can say that with the help of quantitative research we are getting the limited understanding of social context. Then we are having a risk oversimplification. Risk of oversimplification. Now, human behavior is complicated. Turning people's experiences into numbers, yes, of course, it will take some times to make them seem to be simple. Now, I'll give an example here. A questionnaire asks students to rate their happiness from 1 to 5, but someone's feeling may be much more complicated than a single number. Okay, so here complex human experiences cannot always be fully represented by numbers. Then we are having a researcher defined question. The another disadvantage, the researcher usually decides what questions to ask and what answers are available. For example, a survey asks what is main reason you use social media and gives only 5 options. A participant may have another reason that is not listed. So, in simply, we can say the participant may not always have the opportunity to express their own answer freely. Then the last one can be time consuming and expensive. The qualitative research may be a time consuming and expensive because here we are collecting the large scale quantitative research data, and if we are collecting the large scale quantitative research data can require more time, more money, and we need more staff and technology and careful planning for doing this. Okay, so like for example I want to give, like we all know that national wide survey may require thousands of questionnaires, trained researcher data collection and statistical analysis. Okay, and one of the example for this is census, which is done at a national wide, like in the where whole India is covered to survey uh, under the census. So of course we need it, or we require the thousands of questionnaire and the trained researcher to collect the data. And also it becomes difficult for the analysis as well. Then to simplify or to understand it in a simple way, large scale research can require many resources. So quantitative research is useful because it provides objective numerical data, allows large-scale comparison, and can identify patterns. However, it may lack the depth and flexibility needed to fully understand people's experiences and social life. So here we finish with this topic, and we'll continue the another subtopic in our next slide or next presentation. Thank you.